In this lesson, we're going to talk about sending a post request to the server, which you can use to update information in the server. So what we have so far is a simple travel agency site where we're querying the server for the destinations using a GET type of request. And now we want to have it so that when I click on Add to Cart, a post type of request is sent to the server. Ideally, your server should store that, validate that, query the database, send an intelligent response back. But for our example, since we don't have a proper server side, we're just gonna have a static response file, which will be the same for all different products. So that file is basically telling the client that this was successful. You could also, this is something that you can make up for yourself. You can create your own way of telling your client that this was successful. You can have an error, like a custom error message, for example, out of stock or that kind of stuff, and sending the price back as well. What happens then is that the total that was added will be added to this total up here. Okay, so let's start by listening to click events on this add to cart. We have a click event in here when we show more information. So we can use a similar approach but on our cart button. So what I'll do is listen to the body for click events. And when they happen, I want to listen to them but in a button. So how can I refer to this button? Let's look at the HTML. This button is just a button tag and it's inside the item box. So I'm gonna refer to the button that's inside of the item box. In this case, we only have one button per item box. If we did have more, we would have to use classes or some other way to identify them. So when this event is triggered, I would like all defaults to be prevented. And now what I would want first is to grab the ID of the destination, because we have many destinations. They all have their own unique ID, and we're showing those unique IDs in the item box in the data ID attribute. So let me grab that ID by going up from my button to the actual box. So I'll use closest, and I'm gonna grab the item box. So this will give me the corresponding item box where I clicked on, and then I'll use data to access the ID property. Remember that you can use data to access the HTML5 data dash something else properties. Now that I have the ID, I'm gonna ping the server, tell the server to add that element to my shopping cart. So I'm gonna use Ajax again, and I'm gonna go to add item.json. The parameters that I want to have in here are, first, I want to specify that this is a post request. Post requests don't get caged by the server, so I don't need to worry about setting the cage to false in here. The next thing I want to add is the data that I'm sending. The label is going to be ID and the value is going to be that of ID. So this could be anything. This is actually the value that we get from here. And we want to make sure we grab a number from here. So when we want a number, we just add the plus sign in JavaScript. Anyway, so the data type is of JSON, and I can also specify the content type that we are requesting. The server will receive this in the request headers. Now, when this finishes, our promise function response, and we can start by checking this on the console that we're on the right track. Let's reload the page, and we get the success 1 price. You can also go to the network tab and check that in here. You'll see that it was a post method. This is the URL we're querying. We're contacting. That's all the headers, and you can also see that the parameters are here. So you can make sure that they're the correct parameters. Of course, if you go to response, you'll get the actual object that was sent back from the server. Right. So the last thing we want to do now is keep track of this total value. So we want to have a variable. We're going to have a variable called cart, which is going to keep that total 0 at the beginning. And when we get something from the server, whoops, I want to update that response.price, and I want to modify this element here, which has an ID of total cost, and then text. The text is going to be total, and then the value of the total. Let's reload the page and check it. Right, so we can add now elements to our cart. It's very important when you implement these kinds of things, especially if there's money involved, that everything gets checked and validated on the server side. So, for example, I sent an ID, and that ID should be checked against the database, check if there's stock available, if that really exists, if I'm an authorized user, etc., etc. You can obviously add before loading, the before loading method to have like a spinning box or something that tells the user that we're waiting. You can have an error promise, an error function here, just to show if there's any error. You can check here for success. You could check if response.success equals 1, then only then you add it in here. And of course, when you pay and all of that stuff, it all needs to be validated from the server. That's where the secure things need to go. All right, so just to summarize, what we did here was calling a post method on our server, in this case to a static JSON file, but it could have been a database or anything else. The code on the client side doesn't know that this is a static file, because this could be dynamically generated on your server. You don't need to cage post requests. They don't get caged by your browser by default. And this is how you can add certain parameters. You specify the data type as well. And when we got that from the server, we used that to update our user interface and tell the user what his total now is.